The wind rolled in like breath over bone. In the remote valley of Barrow's Hollow, a place so forgotten it had fallen off most maps by the 1800s, locals once whispered of a pact sealed in blood and crows. They called it the Offering, and every solstice, one child would vanish. No ransom, no scream, no struggle, just silence and a black feather left on the windowsill. The earliest records are brittle, parish logs, stained letters from panicked clergy, and folk journals preserved in damp leather-bound notebooks. But one name repeats, Eldrick Vale, a reclusive preacher who arrived in 1783. According to these fragments, he spoke not of salvation, but of balance with the soil. That God no longer listens to prayers, only rituals. Villagers claimed he never blinked, that he could speak in tongues older than the Bible itself. In 1787, the first child disappeared. Her name was May Whitlock, 8 years old, blonde curls, stitched wool dress, last seen playing near the bell tower. Her mother, Elsie, found only a trail of crow feathers, leading into the fog that clung to the forest's edge like rot. A search party was formed. They found nothing. No prints, no blood, no signs of animal attack. Just one strange detail. Claw marks, human-sized, carved into the trees. Dozens of them. And deeper in, someone had drawn a symbol of a circle broken by 5 lines, like a sun split open. 1 week later, the second child vanished. That was when the townsfolk began to speak of the Crow Men. Not monsters, not ghosts, but villagers themselves, cloaked in black, with wooden masks carved into the likeness of crows. No one ever saw their faces, but if you looked long enough at the masks, some said the beaks moved, slightly, like breathing. They always came on the night of the solstice, always in threes. No doors were ever broken, no alarms triggered. And when they took a child, the village, he remained peaceful. No war, no famine, no plague. It was as if the price of blood kept the world in place. In 1793, a storm swept through Barrow's Hollow with such violence it tore the chapel roof clean off and snapped the bell like a wishbone. Lightning struck the old birch tree in the cemetery, the same tree where the town's midwives claimed the first non-baptized child was buried in secret. No one spoke of that child. No one asked who the parents were. It was just known. That solstice, something changed. 3 children went missing. Not 1, 3. And the villagers didn't panic. They gathered in the chapel ruins, clutching candles that hissed in the rain, whispering chants in a tongue none of them claimed to understand. The priest at the time, Father Cyril Dennis, later wrote a confession to the bishop in Arkmore detailing what he saw. They no longer need me. I am a prop. They speak to something older than God. The masks, they are not costumes. They are keys. He was found 2 days later in the bell tower. Eyes gone, tongue carved with the same broken sun sigil. From that year on, the ritual was no longer a secret. It was law, unwritten, unspoken, but followed. Every household drew lots on the winter solstice. Every year, 3 crow masks would appear beneath the threshold of the chosen family. Not a knock, not a sound, just the masks, hand-carved, smeared with ash, with feathers still twitching in the breeze. The family would know. The child would be dressed in linen, their favorite toy tucked under their arm, and just before midnight, the parents would leave the front door ajar. They never watched. They never cried, because crying was considered a curse, a crack in the pact. Children were taught early. At age 5, they were told the story of the Hollow, not as fear, but as duty, as honor. A holy silence, they called it. If you were chosen, you were lucky. You would keep the dark out for another year. One girl, though, she refused. Her name was Alba Wren. She was 10, and when the Crow masks came for her in 1811, she didn't run. She didn't scream. She followed them, willingly, smiling. And what happened to Alba would unravel the entire pact. Alba Wren was not like the other children. Her mother, Agnes, had once been a healer, whispered to be touched by something before the church burned her herb shed. Her father, Matthias, worked the graveyard shift at the tannery and rarely spoke. Locals said the family line was close to the woods, a term used in Barrow's Hollow to describe those who dreamed in black feathers and woke with dirt beneath their nails. When Alba's name was drawn, something unsettling happened. The birds stopped singing. That entire day, not a single crow cawed. No wings flapped overhead. The sky was eerily empty. It was said even the wind didn't blow. The masks came, as expected, just before midnight. Her parents did as tradition demanded. They dressed her in white, kissed her forehead, and opened the door without looking. But Alba didn't wait to be taken. She stepped outside barefoot, her stuffed rabbit in hand, and stared directly into the eyes of the Crow men. She said, "I've seen you before, in my dreams. You stand behind the trees." The 3 masked figures stood still, not statues, not breathing, just still. Then the tallest one extended a hand, and Alba took it. Witnesses claim they walked together into the forest without a sound, the moonlight spilling down in thin ropes through the naked trees. But unlike the others before her, Alba came back. Call. Not that night, not the next, but exactly 6 solstices later, covered in soot, eyes pale like river glass, and a red handprint on her chest. She was 13 now, and silent. The village panicked. Some claimed she was an omen. Others said she had become a crow herself. The elders convened, unsure if the pact still held. But the real terror began when the children started sleepwalking. Every child under 10, without exception, began wandering into the woods at night, eyes open, lips moving in unison. They chanted a phrase none could translate. Saor adravel, Itrayan, Itrayan, Itrayan. Parents began chaining their doors, burning incense, praying not to God, but to the Hollow itself. And still, the children walked. In the winter of 1818, the Hollow changed. The trees began to lean inward, unnaturally bowed like they were eavesdropping. The soil turned dark, rich, almost oily, and strange stones began appearing near doorsteps, flat bone-colored discs etched with the same 5-spoked sigil that had haunted Barrow's Hollow for over 3 decades. The villagers called a gathering. Only one person refused to attend, Alba Wren. She lived alone now, in the upper woods, in a decaying chapel the townsfolk avoided. They claimed it was cursed, that the crows circled it like sentries. One boy who dared throw a rock at her door was found the next morning, without a tongue. When asked what he saw, he could only draw a single shape over and over, a circle of children standing around a rootless tree, chanting with their mouths open, but no sound escaping. The elders, desperate, turned to scripture, not of the Bible, but of something older. Buried in the rectory was a book bound in raven hide, its pages written in iron ink. No one remembered who put it there. It had no title, just one phrase etched on the cover. Balance is paid in bone. Within its pages were rituals, the exact number of steps between the trees, the shape of the masks, and instructions for how to call something they referred to as the beak beyond the sky. It revealed the truth behind the solstice offerings. The crowmen were not human. They were once villagers, chosen generations ago, transformed by rites involving hollowed bone flutes, sacrificial breath, and crow's blood fermented underground. They were not demons. They were keepers. Their duty was to maintain balance between Barrow's hollow and whatever lay beneath the roots of the world. But Alba had broken the chain. She had returned from the offering, something no other child had done. And now, the pact was unraveling. The children's sleepwalks were not random. They were rehearsals. Rehearsals for a ceremony none of the elders recognized. One with no written record. One that hadn't been performed in over 400 years. The hollow wasn't demanding another child. It was preparing to take them all. By the spring thaw of 1819, no one spoke aloud in Barrow's hollow. Not in the streets, not in their homes. Even the church bell remained still. The villagers moved like ghosts, whispering prayers in corners, eyes scanning the tree line. The silence wasn't fear anymore. It was surrender. The children continued their night rituals. Each evening, as dusk swallowed the hills, they rose from their beds in perfect synchron. Barefoot, eyes rolled white, lips twitching. They walked in circles around their homes, humming a note too low to be heard, but deep enough to make the dogs whimper. The elders tried salt lines, then ash, then fire. Nothing worked. And Alba watched it all from the chapel on the hill, her hair now streaked with silver, her eyes always fixed toward the sky. She didn't speak. She hadn't uttered a word in years. But once, she wrote something in chalk outside the village well. The crowmen no longer choose. The roots have risen. The solstice takes what it wants. That night, the lake turned black. Not from mud or algae, but from feathers. Thousands, floating, oily, rotting. The air reeked of sweet decay, and every fish washed ashore, eyes missing, mouths filled with soil. The village baker, a man named Tom Willers, decided to flee with his 3 daughters. He packed in secret, left under clouded moonlight, and made it as far as the edge of the hollow. They found him the next morning. Split open, not torn, unfolded. His skin peeled like paper, arranged in a spiral across the forest floor. And in the center of that spiral, one of the crow masks sat upright, not carved, grown, out of bark. The youngest daughter was never found. Alba returned to the village that evening, walked straight to the chapel ruins, climbed atop the broken bell tower and whispered, "The offering must be reversed. The wrong child was taken." For the first time in generations, thunder cracked the sky on a solstice night. That had never happened before. Because tonight, the crowmen weren't coming. Something else was. The storm that struck Barrow's Hollow that night was unlike anything in living memory. Lightning danced along the forest floor like serpents. The wind screamed through the trees with voices, not the sound of wind, but actual syllables, fragmented and hollow, as though the forest itself was speaking through broken teeth. At exactly midnight, every candle in the village blew out simultaneously, and from the woods came no footsteps. only a vibration, a deep rhythmic pulse in the ground, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. The villagers gathered at the chapel ruins, trembling, clutching whatever holy relics they still believed in. They expected the Crow Men. They expected masks, ritual, even death. What they saw instead was Alba. She walked alone, but she wasn't empty-handed. In her arms, she carried the bones of a child, perfectly clean, wrapped in linen soaked in oil. Her eyes were pure white now, glowing faintly. Her voice, when she spoke, seemed to come from beneath her feet. The offering was broken. The hollow has awoken. Behind her, the tree line shifted, not like wind, but like something massive moving within it. A shape, slow, breathing, watching. Alba placed the bones in the center of the chapel, directly beneath the shattered bell. She began to chant in the old tongue, the same one the sleepwalking children had spoken. But this time, it was louder, sharper, and the others joined in. One by one, the children emerged from their homes. Barefoot, eyes wide, each of them carrying a small object, a toy, a locket, a ribbon, a doll. They placed them around the bones like a shrine, and then they knelt in perfect unison. That's when the bell rang. No rope, no wind, no hand, just one single chime. Deep, hollow, final. Alba collapsed. The ground beneath the bones began to sink, not crack, not break, but soften, as if the earth were swallowing them whole. And it did. The bones disappeared into the soil. The toys followed. Then the light faded. The ritual was done. But what had it reversed? What had they just invited back in? Because from that moment forward, no child in Barrow's Hollow ever aged again. It began with whispers in the schoolhouse. Children, once lively and restless, now sat perfectly still. They didn't blink as often. They didn't squabble. And when asked a question, they paused, as if searching for a response that wasn't entirely theirs. By the following month, it was clear none of them were growing. No height change, no weight, no lost teeth, no birthdays. Their bodies were frozen in place, suspended in a moment of childhood that refused to yield to time. One physician from a neighboring town, Dr. Edric Hollard, came to investigate. He took measurements, ran tests, and then he vanished, left behind only his coat and a crow's feather tucked inside the breast pocket. The townsfolk tried to deny it, but something in their bones told them the truth. Barrow's Hollow had slipped out of the natural order. Time no longer moved forward for its children. It didn't move at all. At first, some rejoiced. Their children would never die. They would never grow old, never suffer. But then the stillness set in. Children stopped dreaming. They stopped playing. They began repeating phrases in perfect unison even when scattered across the village. The soil remembers the first child. The hollow will never be hungry again. And then they began digging. At first it was random. Little hands clawing at flower beds, roadsides, tree roots. But then it became coordinated. Circles, spirals, always in the same pattern. 5 lines through a sun. One night, a mother found her son standing in their cellar, fingers bleeding, whispering into the dirt. "She's still down there, waiting for the rest of us." The villagers pleaded with Alba, who hadn't spoken since the ritual. She stood outside the chapel ruins, humming a lullaby no one recognized, a song that chilled the air. One elder, desperate for answers, struck her with a lantern rod, not out of hatred, but terror. She didn't bleed. Her skin split like paper, and underneath was black feather, Not costume, not mask, flesh. She wasn't Alba anymore. She was something older wearing her name. Something born beneath the hollow. The realization shattered them. Alba was the first crow. Not a victim, not a survivor, a vessel. The villagers, once complicit in silence, now stood at the edge of something unspeakable. An unbroken line of offerings that had twisted time, death, and even childhood into ritual. And now, that ritual had evolved beyond them. The children no longer recognized their parents. They moved through homes like tenants in a borrowed space, speaking to walls, scratching sigils into wood with their fingernails. One boy, barely 6, carved a perfect map of the valley into the floorboards, every house, every tree, and one location that didn't exist on any map. The locals called it the Hollowing, a name that emerged on every child's lips in the same monotone voice. No one dared go to it. Until Mira Dent, a young widow who had lost her daughter during the original offerings, packed a lantern, rope, and blade, and entered the woods alone. She followed the pattern carved by the children, 5 spirals, each marked with a bone totem. No birds, no sounds, just cold air that pulsed like a giant lung beneath the earth. What she found wasn't a clearing. It was a pit. Wide, bottomless, breathing. From the edges hung dozens, maybe hundreds, of crow masks, swaying in wind that didn't touch the trees. Beneath them, etched into stone, was the same ancient glyph, a sun broken in 5. Mira stepped closer and heard her daughter's voice. Not a memory, a voice, whispering, calling her name, singing the lullaby Alba had once hummed outside the chapel. But as she leaned over the edge, the ground gave way, not crumbling, but retracting, like something letting her in. She fell for seconds that felt like hours, until she landed not in dirt, but in feathers, a bed of them, warm, alive, pulsing like heart muscle. And there beneath the earth she saw them, all the children, every child ever taken, standing in a perfect circle. Eyes open, not dead, not alive, waiting. Mira's breath caught in her throat. The air in the pit was thick, not with dust or mold, but whispers. They didn't echo. They folded inward, as if the space itself didn't reflect sound but absorbed it. The only light came from above, faint and gray, filtering down in a single beam that shimmered off the feathers like oil. And then the children moved. Together. Simultaneous. Not shuffling, not sluggish, but graceful, like dancers in a ceremony rehearsed for centuries. They turned to face her, their eyes glowing with that same pale river-glass sheen Alba had returned with. Not one blinked. Her daughter stood at the center of them all. Mira tried to run to her, but her legs didn't move. The floor was breathing. Each time she inhaled, the pit expanded. Each exhale, it closed tighter, and then the chanting began. Soft, melodic, like a hymn sung through teeth. The pact was broken. The gift was taken. The roots remember. The sky must close. Her daughter stepped forward, but this wasn't the same girl Mira remembered. Her face was unchanged, still 8, still innocent, but the way she carried herself, slow, regal, otherworldly, told Mira she had become something else entirely. She spoke in a voice layered with many. You mourn a shell. The child you buried was devoured. I am what remains. Mira wept, dropping to her knees. The feathers beneath her pulsed. One by one, the children extended their arms, palms up, revealing objects, tokens from above, ribbons, teeth, stones, even a music box, still ticking. They began placing them at Mira's feet in a circle, an offering to her, to become something new. She begged to be released. They only stared. And then her daughter raised a finger and touched Mira's forehead. For a moment, Mira saw everything. The first ritual, the birth of the hollow, the villager's bargain, the creature beneath the roots, shaped like a bird but larger than any cathedral, its feathers made of screaming mouths. And in that instant, Mira understood. This was never about saving the village. It was about preserving the cage, and it was cracking. Above the pit, the village awoke to an unnatural calm. The children were gone. Beds unrumpled, windows wide open, no footprints, no feathers, just silence. And a low hum, audible only if you stood still, like something vast and metallic was spinning beneath the dirt. Alba, or what wore her skin, stood once more atop the chapel ruins. This time she held a book made of stitched mouths. It didn't speak. It breathed. She opened it to the first page. A single word. Rend. The elders had no more answers. The parish was deserted. The last priest hanged himself with his rosary the night before, his final sermon carved into the floorboards with broken fingernails. We fed it to protect ourselves. Now it comes to feed. Meanwhile, Mira was still in the pit, motionless, but alive. Time didn't pass the same way down there. Her body had stopped aging. Her thoughts ran in loops, but her mind was opening. The children had formed a circle around her, arms raised. They were not chanting anymore. They were waiting. Above, Alba began her final ritual. She cut her own throat, not deeply, just enough to let the blood flow in a steady rhythm. With each drop that hit the pages of the book, something shook beneath the ground. Trees cracked, wells collapsed. The bell in the chapel rang continuously, though no wind stirred. That's when the villagers saw the sky begin to ripple. Not clouds, not storm, but a veil. A thin, membranous film that began to peel back, revealing something behind it. Feathers, eyes, beaks, too many to count. The hollow wasn't just below them. It had grown above. It had always been inside the sky, waiting for the barrier of ritual to thin. And now, with no offerings left, no sacrifices made, the cage had finally split. A scream rose from the pit. Mira. But it wasn't a scream of fear. It was a warning, a prophecy. Cover your eyes. Don't look at it. If you see its shape, it sees you back. Too late. One boy stared and began to bleed from every pore. The boy's name was Eli Darren. 12 years old, always curious, always the first to peek through cracks he wasn't supposed to see. When the sky split open like stretched skin, he did what any child would do. He looked. His scream didn't sound human. It came out wrong, as if filtered through water and broken glass. His mother ran to him, but the moment she touched his shoulders, her fingers blistered. The air around him began to bend, light warped, time shuddered. His eyes were gone, just empty hollows, but inside them, feathers moved. Then he opened his mouth and began to speak. It was never caged. It was always patient. Your children were not offerings. They were seeds. He collapsed. But he wasn't dead. He was changing. His limbs grew long and thin, his skin cracked in spirals, and down his spine, new bones pushed outward, wing-shaped, unfinished, pulsing with wet cartilage. Villagers watched in frozen horror as Eli twisted and shook, becoming something not bird, not boy, but something in between. And then others began to speak the same way. One by one, the villagers' children, the ones who had resisted the sleepwalking, who hadn't yet vanished, began to murmur the same phrases, as if they'd been waiting for Eli to unlock something inside them. The feathers remember. The breath beneath the ground is ready. The hollow was only sleeping. Alba raised the mouth-stitched book high above her head. The blood now poured freely from her neck, running down her chest like red ink across blank scripture. Behind her, the sky writhed like a wounded animal, tearing, folding, collapsing inward on itself, and then it stepped through. Not fully, just a limb, a single black leg, avian in shape but far too large, came down from the tear in the sky and pierced the earth just outside the chapel. The ground cracked, the air turned sweet, and every remaining adult dropped to their knees, not out of worship, out of instinctual submission. This was older than God, older than language, and it had returned to reclaim what the pact had delayed. The black leg stood motionless, talons sunk deep into the soil. Beneath it, the earth didn't break. It surrendered. Cracked in a perfect ring, the land breathed outward, releasing a moan that was not wind, not movement, but memory itself being exhaled. The villagers clutched their ears, not from pain, but grief. They began to remember. Things they had forgotten, or things that had been taken from them. A missing hour, a forgotten sibling, a lullaby that once ended in fire. The hollow had not simply fed on children. It had fed on lineage, on continuity. Every generation had surrendered not just life, but story. Alba, or what was left of her, lifted her arms and collapsed backward into the dirt. The book of mouths closed itself, the lips twitching one final phrase. The gate is not a door, it is a womb. And something began to crawl out of the sky. Not a creature, a procession. Figures, human-shaped but incomplete. Bodies cloaked in feathers, faces stretched into beaks, eyes missing. Not the crowmen of the original pact. These were hatchlings, still forming. Some crawled, some floated. All of them wept as they descended, as if being born caused them pain. And at the center of the pit, Mira stood, alive, changed. Her veins glowed with amber light. Her fingers had elongated, and feathers had begun to bloom from her back. But her eyes still held grief. She raised her hand. The hatchling stopped. "No more children," she whispered. "You've taken enough." But the hollow did not answer. Instead, the sky stretched wider, and the villagers heard the voice. Not through sound, through their bones. Balance is not a favor. It is debt. You delayed it with blood. Now you pay with time. In an instant, every adult aged at once. Hair turned white, skin cracked, backs bent, teeth fell. Decades in seconds. Some turned to dust, others screamed until their throats collapsed. Barrow's Hollow was no longer a village. It was a nursery, a nest. And the children, the still ones, the sleepwalkers, the seeds began to hum again. The ritual wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Barrow's Hollow was no longer on any map. The forests had swallowed the roads. The river had rerouted. Travelers who passed nearby felt an instinct to turn around, a pressure in the chest, A wrongness in the air, like staring too long at a corpse and waiting for it to blink. The village existed in name only, but it still breathed. Beneath the trees, the children of the pact walked barefoot in endless spirals, their eyes reflecting the sky, not the one above, but the one they had opened. They sang as they moved. They sang without mouths. They carried no toys anymore, only eggs, pale, translucent things, warm to the touch, pulsing with unseen heartbeats. They weren't laid, they were grown, in cradles of bone, in pockets beneath the chapel floor, in the hollowed skulls of the original crow men, who now hung like fruit from the boughs of ancient trees. The hatchlings had begun to roost. Everywhere. In silence. In grief. Mira, the once mother, now keeper, stood at the edge of the pit with feathered arms stretched wide. She did not weep. She had no more tears. Her voice echoed only in dreams, and those dreams bled into the waking world. She no longer resisted. She remembered, and memory was fuel for the hollow. Across the valley, time fractured further. Days passed in reverse. Flowers bloomed and died in seconds. Newborn animals grew old before their mothers could blink. The stars above moved differently, some circling, some spiraling inward like eyes narrowing on prey. The villagers, what few remained, tried to leave. They made it 3 steps beyond the border before collapsing. Not dead, rooted. Their skin turned to bark, their mouths sealed shut, and from their backs, black stems grew, each ending in a small twitching mask, not carved, not worn, but born. The crow masks weren't tools. They were faces waiting to be claimed. And the children? They had begun choosing. They stood at the roots of the chapel, lifting the masks gently from the trees, pressing them to their own faces. Not out of fear, out of inheritance. The cycle wasn't broken. It was seeded. And now, the first child was returning. Deep beneath Barrow's hollow, deeper than the pit, deeper than even the memory of soil, there is a space older than birth. It has no walls, no air. It exists in stillness, and it hums with the sorrow of forgotten names. Here, the first waits. Not sleeps, waits. May Whitlock, 8 years old. The first child taken, not by force, but by calling. Her name, spoken in the old tongue, was the key. She walked willingly, smiling, and for centuries she remained untouched by decay, by time, by even the memory of pain. She was the seed from which the pact grew. She was the lie that became tradition, and now she opens her eyes above. The earth shakes in a single, sustained pulse, a heartbeat that echoes through the bell tower, through the chapel, through the bones of every child who still carries the hollow in their blood. The sky splits again, but this time it weeps. Rain of feathers, rain of teeth. May rises through the pit, not carried, not lifted, but levitated by memory alone. Her eyes are solid black, her mouth sewn shut with strands of hair. Around her, the hatchlings kneel. Mira kneels. Even the wind stills. May is not a girl. She is the voice that was once denied a mouth. She floats above the chapel and extends her arms. At her touch, the remaining villagers collapse, not in agony, but in relief. Their bodies unravel, not violently, but gracefully. Flesh turns to mist, bones to dust, names to silence. And in their place, soil, dark, soft, wet soil. She is planting the last garden. Alba's mask, the original, floats from the ruins and settles into May's hand. She presses it to her face. The moment the beak touches her skin, the sky closes. The gate seals. The hollow goes quiet, but not gone. Because now, it doesn't need a door. It has May. It has Mira. It has the children. And every crow that flies over Barrow's hollow now carries a sliver of the old song in its breast, a lullaby meant to remember the pact and whisper it to the next village, to the next mother, to the next child chosen. The world did not end. It simply folded inward around Barrow's hollow. Maps were redrawn, roads rerouted. Scholars dismissed the village as a myth, a mistranslation, a local tale meant to keep children out of the woods. But sometimes, late at night, in certain corners of the world, mothers wake from dreams with one phrase stuck in their throat, a phrase they never learned. They wore crow masks and took one child every solstice. And they locked the windows without knowing why. Miles from the hollow, a young boy named Carter found a mask in the riverbank. Smooth black wood, eyes too wide, beak too sharp. When he picked it up, it felt warm, and something inside him remembered. Not a dream, not a story, a pull. That night, his mother found him standing at the foot of her bed, mask on, silent. He held out a feather. "It's your turn," he whispered. "We've taken enough. Now we plant." From Alaska to Romania, whispers spread, entire classrooms vanishing overnight, shoes left behind in perfect rows, orphanages burning down with no cause, children walking into the ocean and never coming up for air. And when they did, their eyes reflected the sky from another place entirely. Governments blamed cults, gas leaks, mass psychosis. But the old keepers knew better. The hollow had no borders now. It had memory. It had bloodlines. In remote corners of Europe, stone circles began to hum again, sound frequencies that made wolves cry and trees tilt slightly away. A group of hikers in the Pyrenees found a field full of crows, all facing the same direction, all dead, but with human teeth inside their beaks. At the center of it all, Barrow's hollow remained silent, overgrown, abandoned, but never empty. Mira stood at the chapel once more. The new children, those who had never known the world before the rupture, stood around her, each with a seed in their hand, not literal seeds, or fragments of time. Whispers of what once was, what must return, what must be buried again and again, so it can bloom wrong. She raised her hand and pointed to the dirt. They began to dig. The solstice was coming again. Not summer, not winter, but the hollow's solstice. And this time, the sacrifice would not be a child. It would be a mother. She had no name anymore. The woman they brought to the chapel didn't scream, didn't beg. Her wrists were bound in rope soaked with crow's blood. Her mouth was stitched, not shut, but open, lips pulled wide by silver wire. A permanent, forced smile to mock the grief she once gave the world. She wasn't from Barrow's Hollow. She was brought from elsewhere, from the city, the noise, the world that had forgotten silence. They called her the Barren One, and in hollow scripture, that made her perfect. The children formed a circle around her, no masks, no tools, only presence. Mira approached with the book in hand, the one once held by Alba, now aged with new mouths, new teeth, whispering constantly in dead languages. The wind stood still, no birds called, even the insects hid. Then Mira knelt before the woman, and with a single feather she touched her cheek. The woman exhaled, and the world shuddered. The soil cracked beneath her feet and bled, thick black sap oozing up from the earth, smelling of honey and smoke. The chapel bell began to ring, though no rope pulled it. Each toll warped the space around it, like sound itself was decaying. Then the earth opened, not violently, lovingly. It was a cradle, a grave, a mouth. The children led the woman forward. She did not fight, because she remembered. Every mother, deep in her bones, remembers the pact. It is passed not through story, but through womb, through silence, through fear disguised as lullaby. She stepped into the pit. The roots wrapped around her ankles, then her arms, then her chest. Slowly, softly, like vines returning to their tree. And then Mira whispered, "You won't die. You'll feed the next." The roots pulled. She sank without a scream. As the soil closed over her, the sky darkened. Not from clouds, from wings. Hundreds, no, thousands of crows filled the air, each one silent, each one circling the chapel in perfect formation. And as the last feather touched the earth, the flowers bloomed. Black petals, open mouths, each one sang a note, dissonant, pure, ancient. The hollow had fed, but not to end the hunger, to begin the gestation. The moon split, not in the sky, in the reflection. At the edge of a quiet lake not found on any map, Mira stood barefoot, watching her own face ripple in the water, but the face that looked back wasn't hers anymore. The beak was beginning to grow, not a mask, not bone. Her own flesh reshaped. Behind her, the children stood in silence, hands held, heads tilted. A stillness so complete it bent sound. Their eyes reflected not the world, but what was coming. The hollow wasn't content with Barrow anymore. It wanted form. A body. A mother had been buried. A womb had been fed. Now, something needed to be born. The hatchlings began to dig, not with tools but with tongues. Soft, bird-like mouths peeling back the grass, the dirt, the centuries. And what they uncovered was not stone. It was a door, perfectly round, breathing, alive. Not built by humans, grown by sacrifice. It pulsed with each heartbeat of the forest, veins glowing faintly in the dark, like old fireflies whispering lullabies. Mira touched it, and her hand vanished inside. No pain, just warmth. And from deep within it, a sound echoed out. Not music, not voice. A heartbeat. The first. May. Not dead, not waiting. Pregnant. With memory itself. She had become the seed, the vessel, every child taken, every ritual performed, every solstice offered. All had led to this. A single birth. A god shaped like a wound. The crows screamed. Once. Not a cry of warning, but of labor, of arrival. The children began to hum, and Mira began to bleed. Her body wasn't dying. It was splitting, opening in spirals, shedding her skin like ash, revealing the black feathered thing underneath. Arms too long, eyes glowing with fractured moons. A mouth that whispered every name ever lost. And she smiled, not in joy, in understanding. The Hollow had never wanted death. It wanted presence. It wanted to be everywhere, in lullabies, in tree roots, in the forgotten word that slips from your mouth in sleep. Barrow's Hollow was no longer a place. It was a womb-shaped idea, and tonight it would be born through every open window. The wind died across the continent, not slowed, stopped. Trees leaned but didn't sway. Flags stiffened mid-wave. Even breath for a moment paused in the lungs of sleeping children. In every town touched by hollow blood, from the faded graveyards of rural Norway to abandoned mining camps in Virginia, the soil trembled, cracked, and open. Something was emerging, not crawling, not walking, but rising, like a memory too strong to stay buried. A figure, tall as a chapel spire, cloaked in feathers that moved like smoke, crowned with an antlered mask too large for any human skull. Eyes wide, endless, reflecting every solstice ever performed. Its arms were long and ended not in fingers but roots, twitching, ready to plant. It walked without touching the ground. It whispered without sound, and wherever it passed, buildings sagged, clocks stopped, and crows perched in perfect rows along rooftops, silently watching. Mira followed behind it, now fully transformed, the last keeper of Barrow's Hollow. Her wings trailed dust that shimmered like dying stars. The children walked in her shadow, humming the lullaby known only to those born in pact. The entity, the hollow form, came to rest at the heart of the original chapel, where May had first vanished, where the pact began. The stone altar cracked open beneath its weight, revealing not bones, but a cradle. Inside it, a single black egg, trembling, warm, leaking a thick amber sap that steamed in the cold night air. Mira knelt. She sang, a hymn no human ear could hold without bleeding, and the egg cracked. First in silence, then with a shriek, the voice of every child lost echoing at once, layered atop each other, becoming something inhumanly full. Out of the egg emerged not a creature, but a shadow, shapeless, enormous, full of eyes that blinked backward. It poured upward, coating the chapel walls, slipping through cracks, swallowing light. It was a storm of grief, a hymn of vengeance, and a promise of return, all in one. And then it spoke, not in words, in remembrance. You felt it in your teeth, in your spine, in your bloodline. We have been planted. Now we grow. The hollow was no longer hidden. It was everywhere the story was told. The world didn't notice. That's how the hollow won. No apocalypse, no screams in the sky, just a slow, soft shift, like forgetting to add the face of someone you once loved. The entity, the shadow born from the egg, did not conquer. It nested. In libraries, it curled between forgotten books. In hospitals, it whispered from the corners of empty cribs. In playgrounds, it pressed its weight against the swings, rocking them ever so slightly when no one watched. and in every place a child had vanished. The air grew thick with murmurs, not ghostly, not violent, just aware. The children of the hollow did not grow old. They became folklore, seen only in glances, by drunkards stumbling home or night shift workers catching movement in the security cameras they swear wasn't there. Mira watched it all, from the trees. She was no longer one of them, not mother, not guide. Sentinel. A permanent watcher bound to the hollow's will, her wings now moss-covered, her eyes glassy with stars that didn't belong to this sky. She no longer needed to speak. She remembered enough to keep the story alive. In Barrow's hollow, or what once was, the chapel still stood, blackened with age. Roof collapsed, but inside, beneath the floorboards, the soil remained soft, as if waiting. Each solstice, a new feather would appear on the altar. Each solstice, one window in the world would open by itself. And somewhere, a parent would forget a name they had whispered since birth. Not all at once, but slowly, grain by grain. Until that child's bed looked too big. Until the picture on the fridge faded just a little too fast. Until someone asked, didn't they have a son? And no one could quite remember. That was the hollow's true shape. Not horror, but erasure. Not death, but unbirth. A ritual so complete it rewrote memory, replaced fear with quiet, screams with wind, bones with feathers. The world kept turning, news stations kept broadcasting, people loved, lied, lived. But deep, deep beneath it all, in the soft, breathing soil of forgot, in places, the hollow pulsed, waiting for the next name to vanish and the next window to open. The final solstice came on a Tuesday. It rained in Barrow, but not the wet kind. The sky fell in flakes of ash, drifting from clouds shaped like beaks. The chapel was gone, yet the space where it had once stood still refused to grow anything, not even moss. Somewhere in a city far from the woods, a little girl named Wren woke up crying. She didn't know why. Her mother asked what the dream was, but Wren didn't have the words. Only a phrase on repeat. The soil remembers. The final name had already been chosen. Not a sacrifice, a return. For Wren was not new. She had lived before, in Barrow, in 1786, in 1902, in 1961, and now again. Each time as a different shape, a different face, yet always with the same birthmark, a tiny black feather just behind her left ear. And each time, the hollow came closer to remembering itself fully. Wren was the last key. Not to awaken the hollow, but to make the world forget it had ever slept. That night, her window creaked open, the room filled with feathers. No wind, no footsteps, just that humming sound. The same lullaby sung under chapel pews and grave dirt alike. Wren walked barefoot into the dark, her eyes wide with knowing. And waiting for her, by the edge of a puddle that reflected no stars, stood Mira. Bent, ancient, beautiful. She said nothing, just reached out her hand, and Wren took it. The hollow didn't rise that night. It descended, not into earth, but into story, a permanent layer of truth buried in the cracks between bedtime tales and urban myths. A phantom root growing through every forgotten town name, every forest trail no longer on maps, every child's voice whispering something just wrong enough to keep parents up at night. The Hollow was never a monster. It was a memory parasite. And now it had infested the one thing humans could never stop making: narratives. So when you next hear about a child who vanished with no trace, or see a drawing in crayon with too many crows and no faces, or wake up with dirt under your fingernails, unsure why, remember this: they wore crow masks, and they took one child every solstice, but only because we kept telling their story. And that was the real ritual all along.